If you're going to do street photography in a certain place, or if you're going to photograph, let's say what I do with the National Park Service, someone's home of a poet or politician or someone like that, I kind of approach it like an actor, where I go in and I want to know as much as I can about the place and about the person. And I almost want to be able to, when I step into it, almost be like I'm from that community, or I'm actually President Theodore Roosevelt, right? So I kind of approach it that way. But like an actor, once I've done all the background research and I've thought it through and all that, and I kind of inhabit that mindset, then I open myself up for whatever happens once I'm there. So if I'm photographing on the street, I can't prepare very much for who's going to walk in my path or what's going to happen on the street or what the weather is going to be like. And if I'm photographing a presidential home or a poet's home or a landscape, an environmental landscape, I also can't control what's there. And I don't want to prepare for it too much either. I want to give myself a little bit of freedom to kind of shoot from the hip.
This photography podcast is brought to you by Frames, quarterly printed photography magazine. Here is your today's host, W. Scott Olsen, with another fascinating conversation.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast from Frames Magazine. My name is Scott Olsen, and today, oh my Lord, today is going to be so cool. Because, every now and then you come across the work of somebody, and it just strikes a chord. There's an aesthetic, there's an idea, there's an intent there that you resonate with. And it's a kind of project that you say, I wish I was doing this. And some of the work is just reimagining what's possible with photography. Today, we're talking with Xiomaro, who is at one level a street photographer, also a documentarian, a PBS called him a historian with a lens. He has done work with the National Historic Parks, the National Park Service, and just about every portraiture, street photography, you name it, rock and roll. He's done work out there that is just inspiring in its breadth and inspiring in its depth. He has been exhibited internationally. He's got books out there on street photography and more. We're going to get to that in just a second. And he's one of those guys that you look at the work and you think, not only is this image real, I mean, it pops. It's just right there in your face and wonderful. It is the kind of photograph that provokes curiosity. You're looking at a picture of somebody's bedroom in a National Historic Park, and you're looking at it for 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Your eye is scanning all the intricate details, and that's not an accident. That is an artist's vision. And speaking of artist's vision, there's a hell of a story in terms of how he got from being a little kid, doing rock and roll in the basement up to being a world-class photographer. Xiomaro, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. And boy, that was some introduction. I almost didn't recognize who you were talking about. I'm going to have to get you to write my Wikipedia entry.
There you go. Well, it is all earned, man, because this really is remarkable work.
Oh,
so, as I said just a second ago, we're going to hold off on the photography for a second because how you got there is so compelling and so rich. Doing a little bit of research, let me tell you what I know, and then you tell me the story in a little bit more detail.
Sure.
So, okay, you're a kid, you're a rock and roller, just like all of us. I had my, Slinger Linda, then my Ludwig drum set in the basement. Your dad made your first guitar, which I just found absolutely mesmerizing. But you make a turn then. You go off to college and you become a philosophy major, and then you go off to law school, and you're not just any lawyer, you're damn good. I mean, you're the editor of the Journal of International Law and Politics at NYU. But you're not giving up the music. You wind up being a manager as well as a musician, and not just a little manager. I mean, Lisa's hiding out there. I got to tell you some stories about head to toe, by the way. We'll talk about that some other time. And then health issues come in. So how you got to hold a camera in your hand is a long, wonderful, terrible, complicated process. Fill me in on how that all happened.
Sure. First of all, I'm very impressed by your research skills. Man, you dug in deep there. It was amazing.
Not really, but okay.
You're starting to scare me a little bit. The way it all worked out was I never planned to do what I'm currently doing. In fact, I never would have even imagined that was even a direction that I can go in. I've always, liked photography. I mean, when I was a teenager, I used an old Canon AV1, if anybody out there remembers those film cameras. And it was complicated. I couldn't understand it, but, I got a lot of nice blurry pictures out of it. But yeah, again, never really thought of this as a direction. But what happened was, back in 2004, I was actually I was very active in music at the time. And sometimes in between sets, I had to run to go to the bathroom real quick, and usually there was a crowd of people there, so I had to wait. So I was real fast to do it. And I don't think I've told this portion of the story before, but basically when I was urinating, I felt a little bit of pain. And I thought maybe I was getting, what do you call those little granular things you get in there?
Kidney stones or gallstones.
Kidney stones. Yeah, I never had one before, but I thought maybe that's what it was. And then I was also thinking that maybe it's just because I was rushing and kind of pushing myself that's what accounted for the pain. So I ignored it, but then it kept happening. And then I started getting a little nervous about it. And because I was so busy with what I was doing at the time, what I did was unusual. I put off my annual physical exam, but I don't really do that. I'm pretty religious in making sure I do it. But I was so busy, I put it off for a few months. And finally, when I did go, they did the PSA test for, it's a blood test.
Right.
And the PSA test determined that I had prostate cancer. And that was pretty mind-blowing because at the time I was mid-40s. And usually prostate cancer is associated with people who are much older, like, elderly, 70, 80 years old. And of course, you can die from it. So they did another test just to make sure that the blood test, wasn't incorrect. And sure enough, that's what the test revealed. So that was a mind blower because they could not tell from the blood test whether the cancer had spread. If it spread, then, to other organs, and obviously it could be life-threatening. So what they decided was they advised that I do what's called a prostatectomy. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, where basically they remove the entire prostate. But the doctor did say that when he does the surgery, he won't know for sure until he's in there whether it indeed spread. Because all you need is one cell to, to trigger all that. So, and then I had to wait 6 months for the operation. The doctor I went to is a world-renowned surgeon for this. So he was in high demand. He had people from all over the world coming to him. So I had to wait about 6 months for the operation. And so for those 6 months, I'm wondering, well, what's going to happen? I'm going to be dead or alive? I'm going to be incapacitated? I mean, I just didn't know. And because I assumed the worst, that got me thinking, about, well, if I can get past this, do I really want to continue as I have been, in my life? And part of that was getting rid of people who maybe they were well-meaning, but they were really kind of getting in the way of what I want to achieve as an artist. As a musician, I actually had a bootleg recording that somebody did at a show I did. And somehow it found its way into America. What's that big show there? America's Got Talent?
Oh, yeah.
American Idol. American Idol. That's what it was, yeah. And at that time, American Idol actually had a website version of the TV show. And the website version had more alternative music, whereas the TV show is more like R&B and pop music. And that little bootleg actually hit the top 10 of their charts for a week.
I did not know that. Very cool.
Yeah,
in a way.
I didn't even know it either because they sent me an email about it. But the point that I'm making, the reason why I bring that up is because with that level of grassroots success, I wasn't able to get the band to, kind of up their game so we can take advantage of that, and kind of push us to another level. So I was frustrated with all that. After the operation, the doctor said, thankfully it didn't spread anywhere, so you're good. And for many years after that, I continued getting the blood tests and checkups just to make sure that it didn't come back. But that whole experience got me thinking about, well, what do I want to do now? So I had already been taking a lot of photos of the shows that I was doing because also at the time, YouTube was becoming a thing. I forgot what the pre-Facebook was. Well, MySpace was a thing,
Yep. Yep.
And I could not get anybody to take pictures of the band. When they did it, they just wouldn't send it to me. So I bought a little digital camera and I just would give it to a friend or somebody who can just take shots, and we'd upload that to the internet. So, but eventually that camera really drew my interest, and I just started photographing after the surgery. I went out to the parks out west, and it was just a way for me to, I was kind of depressed. I really didn't know what I wanted to do next, and the whole experience was kind of, a downer. But I really felt good about not being in a band, being by myself, just me and this camera, and just photographing and really focusing on what's around me in these parks.
Okay, but there are a lot of other currents going on here, because you've got the law career going on, at the same time. And then in another interview, you talked about, these weird things started coming in from outside. Napster appears, a recession appears. What took you away from law, and having sort of photography as the thing you do on weekends, and made the photography, this is my heart and soul?
Yeah. Part of my confusion at the time was I literally didn't know what to do next, because I just got over this cancer. I was trying to get rid of folks who are kind of standing in my way.
Right.
But as you mentioned, the music industry that I was in was starting to change drastically. At the time, I was an entertainment lawyer. So I was representing mostly musicians, but also all kinds of creative people, actors and models and other photographers and folks like that. But music was the main thing. And I had also just, at the time, just kind of finished managing a recording artist named Lisa. So I was very involved in the music industry. That was my bread and butter. But Napster, for those who might be too young to know much about it, Napster was this social, it was a website that basically people contributed digital recordings of their favorite albums, and then other folks can just download and share it freely. And that was decimating music. You remember that, right?
Yeah.
And that was decimating the music industry, because now they were losing sales of CDs. And this is way before Apple Music and all that sort of thing. As an entertainment lawyer, I always try to help out the musicians, being one myself. And I knew many times these are younger people who don't have a lot of money for lawyers. So the arrangements I would make with them was I would negotiate the record deal. They would get an advance, some money from the record company.
Right.
And then I wouldn't take a percentage of it, but whatever my bill was, I would just wait. When that advance came in, now they would have the funds to pay me. Unfortunately, because the music industry was doing so bad economically because of Napster, the labels weren't putting up money anymore, and they weren't signing very many artists either. So that trickled down and affected me, where basically I had very little business to do. There was nothing happening. And then after that, even though the music industry was already kind of in its own recession, then we had the Great Recession, the worldwide one of 2008. And that really just knocked out the music industry in my own practice. So then I basically had no practice. It was just trickling in. So I ended up working for these large law firms as an independent contractor, just, doing, when they had these really large cases where they had to hire a lot of people or needed a lot of lawyers on it, instead of hiring them full time, they would just hire you on a project basis. So I started doing that just for the cash, basically, because it was not work I was interested in. It was all corporate litigation, mostly from the fallout from 2008, that recession.
Right.
And I was still doing music and still doing, just photography for myself. But what was interesting was that when I did do the shows, a lot of folks were buying these prints that I made of these photographs that I took out west, out in the national parks. I would set up a little table to have my CDs, my T-shirts, so people can buy that.
The merch table.
Yeah. But then I wanted to be different from the other artists. So I said, I'm going to have a little art show. So I had all these framed photos, on display, and I offered them for sale. And interesting, a lot of people really liked the photographs, and that was encouraging to me, because I didn't take them with the intention of selling them. It was just almost like a therapy for me. But when I saw there were people willing to pay money for it, then I realized, well, maybe there's a direction here, because what I like about it is I can express myself artistically But I don't need a band to do it. I don't need one person to hold the camera and one person to press the shutter and one person to set up the tripod. I could do all that myself. And, I work hard. I mean, if I want to stay up all night long to get something done, I'll do that. But I can't always count on other folks in the band to do that sort of thing. They didn't have that same level of commitment. So I like the idea that with photography, I can do that as a solo.
With your philosophy major, with your law degree, we tell students here at the college where I teach, they want to go into pre-law, we say be a philosophy major, be an English major, be something like that, because law is reading closely and writing exactly. I mean, there is a kind of attention to detail that is at the heart of being a good lawyer. And at the same time, you've described, your musical interest as being really invested in live music. Something about the energy, something about the frenetic ambiance. That's too polite of a word. But the energy of a concert, of a club, whatever. Are those two threads complementary? Are they contradictory? How are they coming together to form who you become?
Well, they're definitely complementary. I mean, the precision that is required in analytical thinking as a philosopher or as a lawyer and also in writing, I think is really, really key because, you don't want to flounder. You want to have an artistic vision and an approach to your photography. But at the same time, you don't want to get hung up on that to the point where you are you're not opening yourself up to artistic possibilities. When I was on stage performing, what I loved about it was a certain amount of chaos that I knew was going to happen at some point in time because I played guitar. Lead guitar was my main instrument, and I also sang. But I use a lot of effects. For those of you who are musicians, you know that guitars like to have these pedals that we have, So I always had a lot of them. And then we were often doing material that was new and fresh, so we weren't completely rehearsed. So what would happen is, as prepared as I was, I knew something may go wrong somewhere. And that was kind of exciting, too. It was a little bit dangerous. Mm-hmm. But sometimes those mistakes ended up being something that people liked because they didn't know that it was a mistake, And I would, of course, just kind of go along with it. In fact, there's an old joke or saying amongst musicians that when you make a mistake, right, and it's an error, but the audience doesn't know and they seem to like it, make the mistake again on purpose.
Again, yep, do it again.
Yeah, just do it again. So with photography, it's kind of like that. I mean, I kind of go into a project with a general idea of what I want to do. Like with the National Park Service, for instance, I photographed President Theodore Roosevelt's home, which also was a summer White House. I photographed two different headquarters where George Washington engaged in the Revolutionary War. All these places that I photographed, I will do lots of reading and research into them. And I almost want to inhabit the minds of these folks that I'm photographing their places because they're not alive, so I can't photograph them.
Yeah, you have a cool term for that. And I can't even pronounce it. Basically, it's resident and photographer put together. Oh, yeah. I have yet to be able to get my mouth to say that word.
That's because I made it up. It doesn't exist. It's residentography. Residentography.
I still can't. Okay. Well, first of all, I mean, tell me what you mean by the word and tell me what you mean by the idea.
Yeah. So residentography is the idea that if you're going to photograph, if you're going to do street photography in a certain place, or if you're going to photograph, let's say what I do with the National Park Service, someone's home of a poet or politician or someone like that, I kind of approach it like an actor where I go in and I want to know as much as I can about the place and about the person. And I almost want to be able to, when I step into it, almost be like I'm from that community or I'm actually President Theodore Roosevelt, right? So I kind of approach it that way. But like an actor, once I've done all the background research and I've thought it through and all that, and I kind of inhabit that mindset, then I open myself up for whatever happens once I'm there. So if I'm photographing on the street, I can't prepare very much for who's going to walk in my path or what's going to happen on the street or what the weather's going to be like. And if I'm photographing a presidential home or a poet's home or a landscape, an environmental landscape, I also can't control what's there. And I don't want to prepare for it too much either. I want to give myself a little bit of freedom to kind of shoot from the hip, almost like I did on stage. I'd rehearse, but I knew there was going to be an opportunity for error, and I'd forget a lyric and I kind of have to make it up on the spot. And so those happy accidents will sometimes result in some really interesting musical performances or some really interesting photographs. And as we spoke about earlier, I'm not a very technical guy, so I'm not consciously thinking about f-stops and this, that, and the other thing, or lenses. I mean, I just kind of go with what I have, and it's really kind of taking everything that I've read about and drawn into my mind, and just letting it percolate in there, and then it just comes out depending on what I'm influenced by in the environment.
You bring up an interesting point, and you are mainly a street photographer in New York, and you live there. I mean, so your research is every minute of every single day. If you were to go to some place you've never been, Sao Paulo, Sydney, whatever, would you do the months of research before you got there? Or would you say, here I am, world, show me what you got?
I do the research in advance. In fact, I'm doing it right now on several locations that I'm photographing for potential future books. So I will do the research in advance. But then as I'm shooting, I keep doing the research, because as I become this residentographer, right, if I'm immersing myself in the community, I start becoming more aware of it. And so then I can pinpoint my research a little bit deeper. So I try to get to kind of the spirit of the location, because in many cases, when one visits, say, New York City or some other towns, we kind of go there as a tourist. So we get drawn to the same places everybody else goes. And I want to avoid all that stuff. Not really avoid it. I mean, I will photograph it, but I don't want to approach it as a tourist, where it's the same shot of Radio City, the facade, or Times Square. So I try to delve deeper on, well, let's not just focus on the tourists, but who are the people who work here? Who are the people who live here? What's important to them? What's their culture like? And trying to get a little bit of that in the photographs, which is a hard thing to do because the photos by their nature are an abstraction. So then you start thinking about, well, if I do a book, how do I write about this? How do I approach captions? What story do I want to tell? So it's a lot of different things kind of mixed up. It's not just taking a picture and that's it, and getting an interesting composition, but I'm thinking in my head, how can I sequence these pictures to tell a story in a museum exhibit, or in a book, or in some other, in some other vehicle for getting that out there.
When you mentioned composition, do you have any formal photography education at all?
Just YouTube, but I did take a lot of art history courses when I was in college, as well as studio art classes.
Okay.
When I think compositionally, a lot of it, I'm really drawing it more from paintings like Rembrandt, Goya, Vermeer. These are wonderful painters, because really the history of visual art is a lot longer and more deeper on the painting side than the photography. Photography's only been around since 1839, I think is the year. Mm-hmm. So I draw a lot of it from there. And many people have commented, especially on my national park photography, that there is a painterly quality to it. I'm very comfortable using blurs, for instance. I'm very comfortable not worrying too much if there's detail in the shadows. I read these forums where people obsess over that stuff, and I don't care if it goes all black, Yeah. There's a lot of paintings from Goya that are all black, and it gives you this sense of mystery. So more of it is that than anything else, I would say. And also music contributes to that too, because in music, in fact, Ray Charles had, I'll paraphrase him, but he said something to the effect that, when you do a movie, you have an hour and a half to tell your story. If you have a book, you have hundreds of pages to tell your story. And if you're doing a Broadway play, again, a limited amount of time to tell your story. When you do a song, you generally have like 3 minutes, 4 minutes to tell your story. And in photography, it gets compressed even further, I would say, because you have even less time to get that across. So
1/4000th of a second.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not capturing the entire scene because it's just a frame. It might be a rectangular or, a square. So a lot of it is also what you omit. But, that's part of what I think about. It's like, well, how do I put things together in a way that either tells a story or maybe doesn't tell a story. It kind of leaves it open to the viewer. There's some ambiguity and some mystery to it. Also, they're like puzzle pieces for me. If I take enough photos of a certain place, I want to have enough variety where I can kind of move them around in sequence, so that maybe the individual photo doesn't tell you too much, but when you put them all together with some other ones, you come away with a certain, not just a story, but even a feeling, just like you would in music. Yeah.
Tell me the story of 2011. You wind up getting a residency at the Weir Farm National Historic Site. What made you first fill out the application for that? I mean, because you could have done landscape stuff. You could have gone out to Arches. You could have, done Yosemite or the Badlands, whatever. But you wanted to go to a historic site. They gave you got the residency. So tell me why you did it, what you did when you were there, and this became a watershed for you.
Yeah, that is absolutely key. It's called Weir Farm National Historical Park. They actually changed their name. It's in Wilton, Connecticut. I got this email from the AAA, the Automobile Association of America.
the great art sponsorship of the AAA. Okay.
Yeah, I owe it all to them because in this email that I got from them, it was like a newsletter. They were recommending Weir Farm as a good place to go for a day trip, And I never heard of it before. I mean, Connecticut, it's far, not far from New York. I never heard of it. Also, I studied art history. And Weir Farm is named after Julian Alden Weir, who is a very famous American Impressionist painter. But name didn't ring a bell, so I was very intrigued by it. And this email arrived during that period of time you were alluding to earlier, where basically I was just kind of floundering. I was, not really in law anymore. I was kind of doing it as a side gig with these big firms, and music was kind of going downhill for me. So I was looking for a direction, and I had purchased the camera years earlier because I wanted to go more into it, as I mentioned, since people were buying pictures, but I was still kind of floundering with it. Like I couldn't find a direction for it. So I decided to go to Weir Farm. Not even for photography. I just wanted to check it out. I thought it was intriguing. But what happened was my wife and I went on a ranger-led tour of the place.
Okay.
And the ranger kept referring to the fact that Weir Farm, because it is the homestead of a famous painter, that they have an artist in residence program. And this is a way to develop new talent, or for artists who are established to be able to, maybe finish off a work or something like that. But it's part of the tradition of this park. I had never heard of an artist in residence program, and that really intrigued me. And the ranger kept encouraging us, saying, if you know of an artist or if you're not an artist and you want to apply, make sure you stop at the visitor center to get an application. Well, that really fired me up, and I wanted to do it. But to be honest with you, I said, well, I'm not an artist with a capital A, and I don't have a portfolio. I've just been messing around all this time, okay, maybe in music, I'm confident with that, but not in photography or painting or anything. So my wife and I are walking to the parking lot to go home, and this just kept nagging at me, I said, do I really want to leave here and not pick up that application? To be honest with you, Scott, I was actually embarrassed to go into the visitor center and ask for the application because I didn't feel I was worthy. It's like, how dare I ask for an application,
Yeah.
But, being the manly man that I am,
there we go.
I turned around and I got my wife to do it for me. I said, hey, do me a favor. I'm too embarrassed. I admit it publicly. I'm shaming myself here, but I asked her, I said, do me a favor, go in there and get the application for me. So she did it. She didn't
look at you and say, no, go get it yourself.
Oh, my wife is used to my insanity. So she got it for me. So I looked at the application and I said, there's no way they're going to accept me. I don't have any of the stuff they have here. Plus, I went online and I saw that all their previous artists in residence were professors, people had these big credentials. They had PhDs in art and they had exhibits, and I had none of that stuff. And then also they asked for recommendations. And I'm thinking, well, who's going to recommend me? I don't know anybody who's going to be able to comment on my art. So what little I was doing of it. So I went through the application. I prepared it anyway because they asked a lot of really good questions about, what is your philosophy of art? What's your viewpoint? What are you trying to accomplish? Lots of internal things that I had not considered before. And so I figured, well, let me prepare the application because it's good practice. I'll submit it. I know they're going to reject me, but this way in the future, I kind of know what they're looking for. And in a future application, either here or some other place, maybe I'll have a better shot at it. Well, I prepared it the best that I could. I submitted samples of my work. They wanted a portfolio. And at the time I was doing a lot of abstract photography, things where I was, turning the composition upside down, where you had no sense of what you were looking at, reflections off of, surfaces like water and things like that. It looked almost like it was photoshopped, but it wasn't. It was straight out of the camera, other than some small adjustments for contrast and saturation and all that. But that intrigued them. And I was explaining to them in my application, and I don't want to get too nerdy here, but since you asked the question, I'll do it anyway. I explained to them that I was fascinated, and this was true. I was fascinated by something called the Mandelbrot set. If anybody out there is familiar with that, it's a different kind of geometry. And the thinking behind it is that all geometry is, and I'm going to explain this poorly because I'm not a smart person in that way, but
a geometrist.
Yeah, I'm not a geometrist, if there's such a word. But basically, there's a certain shape from which all other shapes come up. So when you think of Euclidean geometry, you have squares, right? Spheres. These are triangles. These are all perfect shapes. But those shapes don't reflect what we see in tree leaves, for instance. Or if you're flying over the landscape, you see the coastal lines, right? The Mandelbrot set is this, anybody can look it up and you can see what it is, what I'm referring to. Mandelbrot is Mandelbrot, for those of you who want to find out what this means. But the Mandelbrot set is a shape, and if you look at it, you could see how if you multiply that shape, you can start approximating the look of a tree or the look of a mountain, of a mountainscape. And so that really intrigued me on many levels. And I was kind of exploring that with these photos that I submitted for this application that I thought I was going to get rejected on. But surprisingly, they actually thought it was intriguing too. And so they accepted me. And I was completely blown away by that. I was like, holy cow, I can't believe I pulled this off. And to this day, I still think that maybe someone canceled and they had to fill in a spot and they stuck me in there. So
I mean, the original idea always has strength. So, I mean, you got 85 applications and they're all saying the same thing. Here comes one from left field and you think this guy's good. This guy's got some creativity. Yeah,
maybe it was that. I mean, I don't think I was pulling that off entirely with the pictures, but that was my intention behind it. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't even aware of that too much at the time. I was taking the photographs. It was because of the questions that was asked in the application that it forced me to write this out, because they want you to submit like a statement about what you're doing. And so it was actually very helpful in that way. But that ended up putting me into the park for a month-long residency where I lived in the park in a historic cottage. Mm-hmm. And I tried approaching, this Mandelbrot set type of photography on the grounds. And I just wasn't seeing things that lent itself to that kind of a photograph. So I was kind of at a loss there once I arrived. But I ended up photographing the beauty of the park. They have some beautiful architecture there, beautiful landscapes. I mean, these are landscapes, Scott, that inspired not just Julian Alden Weir, but also all of his famous painter friends. People like John Singer Sargent, for those of you who are familiar with painters like that. And so there are paintings in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and other world-class museums that reflect this very landscape that I was living in. So for photography, it was great.
And they wouldn't let you go.
They wouldn't let me go, because what happened was after I finished the residency, then I was lost again. It's like, well, where do I go from here now? What do I do? And so I was floundering again. But then a few months later, the park called me up and they said they were interested in some of the photographs that I took. And I got a little bit nervous there, because what happened was I actually met the son or the grandson of Julian Alden Weir. He came to an open studio that I was required to present as part of the residency. He really liked the photographs that I took because he actually grew up there as a child. So he could tell that I was connecting with the environment, with the architecture, and it was heartfelt. So he arranged for me through the Park Service to actually get entry into the buildings, which at that time were closed to the public because they were under renovation. And so I photographed the interiors, but I was just doing it for myself. They were like snapshots. It was very dark in there too, so a lot of stuff came out blurry. I was being led on a personal tour, and I didn't want to hold them up, say, oh, can you wait for about 5 minutes? I can set my camera up, so I was just snapping away. But they were interested in those photos, and then I thought maybe I was not supposed to do that. I wasn't sure what they were asking me about it, but it turned out what they wanted was they wanted to see if they could use the photographs to document this part of the park's history and to maybe use it in a public way to intrigue the public about what this park is about. So I said, well, I'm really flattered that you asked me, but these photos are really not very good. However, I'd be more than happy to, go in there properly and shoot it the right way. And between you and me, I mean, I didn't tell them this, but I assumed they were not going to pay me and I was just going to do it as a freebie, and I would have done it. But they said, basically they formally commissioned me to do the project. So they gave me access to the whole place.
It should not be this easy, man. I just want to let you know that.
Well, it's funny you should say that because, as a lawyer and someone who's very organized, I plan a lot of things. I'm very good at planning. And there's no way something like this could be planned. It's almost like there's this invisible hand that's just guiding things to happen. Because again, I never even heard of an artist in residency. And now because of it, I got accepted, not thinking I would get accepted. And then I get this project. And all of this was triggered through cancer. I kind of joked in a black humor kind of a way that in a way, cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me because it would not have launched me into this direction.
Let's take just a quick break. We hope very much that you are enjoying today's episode. The very fact that you are listening to this podcast suggests that photography means a lot to you. And if that's the case, you might want to have a look at Frames, quarterly printed photography magazine. We truly believe that excellent photography belongs on paper. Visit readframes.com to find out more about our publication and use the coupon code podcast to receive a recurring 10% discount on your new Frames magazine subscription. And now, back to today's conversation.
In this work, and in the work that you do, we'll get to this in a second, at other parks, is there a real difference between being a documentarian and being a fine art photographer?
You could certainly shoot in a documentarian way. So, for instance, I did do one little tiny project for Newsday. It's a newspaper in New York. But, if you're shooting for a newspaper or, a publication like that, then there's going to be more of a straight shot. You're not going to do much editing afterwards. You really kind of want to document what's happening there. It's a little bit more straightforward. As an artist, you could take more liberties. You can introduce. Now, I have to say, having said all that, if you look at some of the photography, say in the New York Times, every now and then you get some really interesting shots, and they're not part of the art section or anything. It's just actually part of the hard news section where they'll use reflections, they'll use blurs, they use silhouettes and things that are kind of artsy. But for the most part, it's going to be pretty straightforward. I like to approach it where it's a little bit of both. I want to be documentary in the sense that people they'll know what Weir Farm is, what it's about. But at the same time, as an artist, I want to challenge myself, and I don't want to just take shots like you see in a newspaper. I want to take something that's a little bit weird. So what I do is I do both. I usually will have an establishment shot like you have in a movie or in a sitcom where it kind of shows you like an outside shot of the house. And then the next scene are the people in the kitchen talking about something. So I'll usually do those shots so we kind of know, like as an anchor, so we know where we are and what it's about. And then I start getting, I started doing other things. So maybe I'll start photographing small details. New York Times commented on that I do a lot of small detail work. And I like doing that. I want people to get really close to an object that they can't when they're behind a velvet rope or when they're rushed because it's a timed tour that they're on. And also they can't get into the room, whereas I'm allowed to go into the room. So I can get really close to a historic artifact that belonged to Washington, for instance. And I can get a shot of it where you can see the texture in it, you can see the detail, and you can linger over it and like really get close to something that you're never going to see. In some cases, these are objects that are not even on public display. They're in the archives, and they're too rare to be exposed to the public. So I'll do shots like that are really detailed and close. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's fast forward a little because you got a couple of really cool stories when you were shooting Teddy Roosevelt's summer place. Mm-hmm. The E that's been scribed in, or carved into a wall, patterns on wallpaper. Your attention to detail was teaching people there about the place.
Yeah, that's a good example. Actually, there is there's a letter E that one of Teddy Roosevelt's kids scratched into a door jamb. And that little E, I mean, you'll never notice it unless someone points it out to you because it's very small. But that E was done by the child because he wanted his sister, I can't remember her name, but it began with an E, and he wanted to get her into trouble. He wanted her to get the blame for it. And I just thought that was a really interesting little anecdote, little story, because as a parent myself, I can remember, my kids doing that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But that kind of humanizes this iconic, larger-than-life figure known as Teddy Roosevelt. And what it also does is it takes the spotlight away from him and it puts it on the other family, the other members of the household that are supporting what he does and a part of his history. So when I do photography, I look for little details like that.
I suppose the Rangers told, when you said, what's this E, they told you the story behind it? Yeah,
what happened was when I photographed his home, one of the reasons why they commissioned me for it was because they saw my pictures of Weir Farm. And those pictures of the interiors, the entire house and the studios are all empty. There was nothing there. and yet I was able to make it kind of interesting because as one editor of a newspaper told me, I was ignoring your press releases because I'm thinking, well, what could be interesting about a photograph of an empty room?
Right.
But somehow I was able to, make it interesting and moody. So they saw that. And so they wanted me to do the same thing for Teddy Roosevelt's home because they were doing the same thing. They were emptying the entire household, which is a huge project, multi-million-dollar project. And they had to renovate some of the systems, like the alarm system and the heating and all that, and then put it back. So they wanted me to photograph the interiors in a largely empty setting. And so they basically gave me, when it was close to the public, so they gave me a personal tour. And so, yes, the historian there, the historian is on staff. She was explaining all the different rooms to me, and she was pointing out these little things. It's probably part of the public tour, I would think, about the letter E. Mm-hmm. But again, the difference is that I can get nice and close to it, so I can get a nice shot of it. And so I just thought that was
not know. They did not know about the peacocks in the wallpaper.
Right. Yeah, that's another thing that I forgot about. So I'm glad you did your research and reminded me. But there's a little corner of there's a very prominent room in the house called the North Room. And this is where Theodore Roosevelt would meet with important dignitaries. So it was a very impressive room. And in the corner, there is still some of the original wallpaper from his time period. They had to reproduce the wallpaper for the rest of the room to restore it. So, they said, you're free to photograph whatever you want, but I was intrigued by the wallpaper because I knew it was original. And it's a very elaborate kind of a swirly type of pattern in the wallpaper. And as I'm photographing, and I noticed that they're not random decorative swirls. There's actually images in it. And one of them was of these two peacocks that I think they're facing each other. Mm-hmm. If you look at the entire wallpaper as just one wall of wallpaper, you're not going to notice that. But because I focus on the detail, I saw that, and I just assumed everybody knew that. So I took a picture of just that little piece of the wallpaper, and it's very small. And when they saw it, they were blown away because they go, you know what? We have historians here, professionals with PhDs and all that. And they've been here for, like a decade or more. No one here has ever noticed that before until we saw your photograph. And I was honored by that because I don't know anything. I'm good. See, now this goes back to what I said earlier, right? So I did research on the place and I read about it and I was prepared in that sense. But when I went into it, I also kind of forgot about it all and just kind of let things happen as they do. And I just looked at the wallpaper and I saw the peacocks and I took a picture and I assumed everybody knew, but they didn't. So that was a happy accident. And it's a very popular picture for that reason.
We're going to turn to street photography in just a second, because if people look you up, probably the first thing they're going to see is your street work. But one more question about the parks. I'm looking at a partial list of your commissions here: Big Cypress National Preserve, Boston Harbor, Everglades, Fire Island. There's a long, long list of commissions. Did the word simply get out to the, historic park world that you're damn good, and so the phone starts to ring? Or are these all things that you're chasing down and you're applying for?
I'm very grateful to say that I didn't have to chase anything down. All these park people, they all kind of know each other.
Right.
There's over 400 parks in the country, but the employees are very dedicated to what they do. They can make a lot more money with their knowledge base in the private sector, but they choose to do this because it's important to them. They want to preserve our history and our culture and our environment. So they all know each other pretty much. And also there's an internal, I don't know if they still do it, but there's an internal employee digest or newsletter that goes out that kind of reports on what's happening in the park system. And so I know I've been in that many times. So, one person talks to the other and they find out about these things, and then they inquire about me, and then I do follow up. And so I've been able to get successive projects that way. And to be honest with you, because of the political situation that we're in now with, just cutting back on budgets and all that, and the firings and all that, I don't know for a fact that my national park work is going to continue, just because everything that's going on right now. And that's part of the reason why I've been kind of pushing more towards street photography, which was another unintentional genre that I got into, which we can talk about in a moment. But right now I am photographing George Washington Birthplace National Monument in Colonial Beach in Virginia. So that's the most recent project that I did get. And again, they contacted me about it.
And the project is come on a Tuesday and take some pictures, or come for the year and document some process?
It's pretty open. It's really as much photography as I choose to do.
Oh, cool.
And, we also time it because they get, it depends on their budgets too. So they have a fiscal year. So we try to budget so they have the money for it. I mean, it's not like I get a lot of money on these things, but, we do have to work with it. So many times what happens is these are multi-year projects. And also, the deeper I get into it, the more I discover, the more it interests me, and the more I want to photograph. So, for instance, with Washington's birthplace, I'm photographing the grounds. I started photographing the landscape area there. But as I learned more about it, then I realized that there's more to it than just the fact that he was born there. It's also that the Washington family, they were there for many, many years. It's been a successive generations of Washingtons have lived there and farmed there. And then before that, you had the colonial period. And then before that, you also had the indigenous people who originally were on that land. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I want to do is move beyond just George Washington, the star of the show, if you will, but also take some photographs that represent the indigenous aspect of it. So when I was there last, I was trying to make some connections with, the native community there. And so, it's going to take time to build those relationships, but I do want to get them into the project. So I don't know how many years it'll go for. The previous project was related. It was the George Washington headquarters, military headquarters in Morristown, New Jersey. And that went on for about 5 years.
Oh, my.
Yeah, and it just began as one simple project they wanted. They just needed some photographs for a book that they give to people who, Washington's headquarters, because it's a historical structure, does not have handicap access. So if you're in a wheelchair, you can't get in.
Right.
And they do have a ramp now for that, but it took time to do that because of the budgeting. You got to get people who know how to install that without, messing up the integrity of the historical structure. So in the interim, they created this really large format book with, with shots of the interior and details that they asked me to do. And that's how the project began. It was just to create what they call an accessibility book, so that if you're wheelchair bound, you can borrow this book from the visitor center and you can page through it. And because the pictures are really big and high resolution, you kind of get a sense of what it's like to be inside.
I did not know that.
Yeah. But those pictures ended up getting exhibited at the museum there. And then it just kind of went on from there. Well, how about if you photograph this? And how about if you photograph that? And so then it just went on and on and on. But again, because of the situation in Washington, D.C., I don't know that we're going to have that kind of flexibility. Right. And then because people are getting fired and new people being put in, I don't know if the new people coming in, if they share the viewpoint of the administration, they may not really care too much about these things. So I really don't know. It's a big question mark right now, which is a shame.
Okay. And the switch I want to make now is almost like we're going to be talking, to a completely different aesthetic or a completely different photographer. You have a wonderful book out there, Street Photography of New York. You in an interview, you were talking about your process and, how you go about it. And I had to chuckle when you said, for a little while, you had these sunglasses that had the little rear view mirrors in them so you could make sure you weren't missing something behind you. But you were inspired by Virginia Woolf. So tell me how street photography in any way matches the kind of mindfulness of the documentarian work, and how you approach the most photographed urban environment in the history of the planet.
Right. Well, part of that is ignorance, because sometimes not knowing anything, really helps.
You're the research guy, remember?
I'm the research guy. But what happened was, I realized that, because of the budgeting and the planning for the Park Service work, it could be many months before I get to photograph again.
Right.
And I wanted to get better at what I'm doing. So I was a little frustrated by that. I really should be photographing every day, just like you rehearse every day if you're a musician, or you write every day if you're a poet. But the Park Service doesn't happen every day. So I said, well, you know what? Because of the job that I had at the law firm, I will not embarrass the law firm, although I really feel like doing it. But I had the lowest rung level of lawyer position there, because the thinking was that they pay you very, very little. But they don't expect you to work that much. I shouldn't say not work that much, but you work your 9 to 5, You're not a partner, you're not an associate where you work around the clock, which is very typical of these firms.
Right.
But what they did was they still try to get you to work weekends and work at night, And I really resented that, because I wasn't getting paid extra for it, at all. There was no overtime or anything like that. It was just a flat fee, and it was not very high. So that also made it hard for me to plan to just go out on an outing on my own, and drive somewhere and photograph just to stay sharp. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, I got to work with the situation that I'm in. And, I do commute. I was living on Long Island at the time. So I do commute back and forth 5 days a week to this law firm. And I walk from Penn Station to Midtown, where the firm is located at. I said, well, I'll just photograph my travel every day, whatever I happen to see. And a good friend of mine recommended, who's more experienced than I as a photographer. She also had her own photography magazine and did a piece on me. She recommended a couple of cameras. They're small and stealthy, but had all the functions of a big DSLR, right? Because I was using my iPhone for a while, but the quality wasn't that great. I had an iPhone 7 at the time. So, I got this camera. And I just started photographing, whatever I encountered back and forth. And I did this for about 10 years. And then I sense you're going to ask another question, so I'll just say this. Those photographs over a 10-year period of just going back and forth ended up in this book called Street Photography of New York City, which is available on Amazon and everywhere else.
And But again, how do you approach? Do you just wait for something odd to happen on your walk?
Yeah, what happened was I really just wanted to get better at photographing. And what's great about New York City is that when you walk through it, everything is happening real. Like for instance, when I go to the Park Service, I have a huge DSLR camera, and it's on a tripod. And I take my time moving it incrementally to get the composition just right. I don't use artificial lighting for the most part, but, I work with the existing light and, I can set my exposure and blah, 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 all that stuff, right? And I can think about what the picture means in the overall context of the other pictures that I'm taking to tell the story, as I mentioned, right? And also to be artistic and maybe do something different. On the street, I don't have time for any of that. First of all, I'm trying to catch my train because if I miss it, I'm beat. I got to wait for an hour and a half for the next one. So I'm kind of rushing through the city, and then there's crowds of people in my way, especially the tourists who kind of stand, they look, and they block everybody's walking. And then I got to be careful with pickpockets and people trying to sell me drugs and things. There's police, blocking the road sometimes because there's things happen in Times Square. That's pretty much what I went through. So I was just trying to grab whatever I could and try to create a composition very quickly without thinking too much because there's no tripod and and then I got to do it sneakily because I really wanted to be honest with you, I was afraid to point the camera at somebody.
Really?
Especially in New York, you can get punched or something.
But there are tourists taking pictures of everything every minute of the day.
Yeah, that is true. But as a neophyte, because I had no experience shooting in the street, everything I did was in a safe environment in a national park with rangers to protect me, and there's nobody there.
Okay.
So I was a little nervous about it. I felt like I was invading their privacy, and so I was kind of sneaking it. So it was very nerve-wracking for me. But eventually I got better at it. I got more comfortable with it. And I was just trying to grab whatever got my attention. A lot of it was just people who are dressed in a very interesting way. I tend to dress more on the flamboyant side as a musician. So that naturally attracts my attention when it's colorful. They got interesting hair. Sometimes there are performers that are interacting with folks in a very interesting way too on the street. It might just be a police officer who's literally walking around with a machine gun, with like an AK-47 or whatever it is that they have. And, it's intimidating to see that. But then you say, wow, we're in a very dangerous area given 9/11. So it's just kind of photographing different things. It could be, and then reflections. I'm very interested in reflections. There's a lot of that in New York City.
We're going to run out of time in a second, but so I want to talk about, because you have a new project, a new book that you're working on that's all blur and out of focus and reflections and stuff.
Yeah,
tell me about that project.
Yeah, it's just messy photographs that did not fit. Title? Yeah, it's called It's called Street Photography in New York City. So it's the same title as the previous book, but then it says More Street Haunting, and then it's drama. I gotta remember. It's drama, delirium, and I don't know, some other thing. I have to look at my. But basically, it's these more experimental shots that are based on blurs, strong light and shadow, like you would see in a Caravaggio painting, and lots of really abstract pictures that are kind of delirious because they're reflections off of storefront windows. Mm-hmm. And you don't really know what you're looking at. But to come back to something you said earlier, because I don't think I addressed it, and it's a good thing for folks to know about. When I photographed all this stuff in Manhattan, again, I was just doing it as an exercise. I had no expectation it would become a book, that someone would ask me to publish it as a book. Right. It was just an exercise. But when they did ask me to do the book, the publisher, that is, it was almost like my application for the Weir Farm residency. Now I had to think about, well, what do these photos mean? Why did I do them? Is there a running theme through them all? And as I studied all my pictures, I was able to see themes emerging that were happening on a subconscious level. Mm-hmm. And they were sufficient enough where I was able to break it up into basically the 3 chapters of the book. And so there's one chapter that's more about the people of New York itself as opposed to the tourists, and the different kind of working class folks who, go back and forth and do their different jobs and how they're dressed, as I mentioned earlier. The second chapter is a little bit more political. So you see a lot of the protests that take place in the city. And then the third one is more about the architecture in the city, but also just happy accidents. Someone who might be wearing a certain color shirt that happens to match some flowers above them hanging from a lamppost, for instance. So some of it's instructional. I'm trying to explain to non-photographers who might buy the book how to see like an artist and how to spot these things. But Virginia Woolf, I came across a 1927 essay called Street Haunting. And what she did was, when she went through London, instead of a camera, she wrote down her experiences and her encounters. And these were things that kind of shed light on the human condition, how people live, the drama that happens on the street, these small little fleeting things that happen, but there's some importance or some interest to it. Something that goes beyond the surface, something that goes beyond the touristy things we're attracted to. And that kind of gave me a structure for my book, because in a way, because I was afraid to photograph people, I was kind of haunting them. I was trying to be invisible. I was trying to be a spirit. And in being a spirit, I was trying to capture the spirit of what I saw in the city. I grew up in New York City. So, I kind of experience it and I feel it in a different way. And that's why I kind of wanted to get under the surface. And I don't know that I was successful at it. I leave that up to people who can look at my pictures and read the book. But I connected with that because I didn't know that other people thought that way. So when I read her book or her essay about it, I immediately felt the connection to her writing.
One last question. Yeah, at the time we were recording this, you have a picture up in a group exhibition over in Barcelona called Going Home. Tell me about just that one image.
Yeah, that was an image literally going home. That's my wife in the picture. She's there in silhouette, real small. And it was a foggy day.
Is she going to get an application for something?
Yeah, I need to work her more on that end, get me some more work. But she was, we were just going home together, and I let her walk ahead of me because I liked the way the fog, fragmented the light from the lamppost. Mm-hmm. But it was, the theme of the exhibit is silence. And so they want you to explore, things that it's pretty vague and pretty broad. They leave it up to us to interpret that artistically. But I picked that picture because it was Christmas time, but it was after Christmas. Okay. That particular year that I took it, Christmas fell on a day such that both of us, my wife and I, had to go back to work on a Friday, which is kind of a bummer, Yeah. Who wants to go back to work after Christmas, and especially on a Friday? And also, it was only a couple of years after my daughter passed away. My adult daughter, who was also an artist, had struggled for many years with a little-known condition called borderline personality disorder, or BPD for short. And it's kind of like having manic depression, except that the mania doesn't happen from day to day or from week to week. It can happen from hour to hour. You're up and down, up and down, up and down all day long. So it really wreaks havoc on the psyche. And she eventually died from a drug overdose. And so this was only and it happened around that time of year. It happened around, the holiday period. So just between that, because it was so fresh, it was only a couple of years ago, and then having to go back to work, and it was Christmas, and it was foggy out, and it was kind of dark, and it kind of looked moody like that. It just inspired me to take that picture. Now, I wasn't aware of all these things that I'm telling you now about it. I just kind of took it instinctively and subconsciously. Yeah. But again, because I had to write an artist statement for the, for the application for the open call, I had to really think back and dig deep in myself and say, well, what was going on at the time and what might have influenced this? And that's what was happening at the time. And I have no doubt that that had something to do with the nature of that particular picture.
It is a remarkable, wonderful, beautiful, moody picture. And I do believe that every moment of our entire lives informs the present moment. So when something happens, we may not have, the articulation of every small detail, but it's still, it's still the rhythm section to whatever, melody we're playing. It's
true, because every time I played music, the same song I did, because I wrote the music, it'd always be different each time a little bit, just depending on what mood I was in, what response I was getting from the audience. So yeah, you're right about that, the rhythm.
Well, I think music has an awful lot to say about photography. And in your particular case, I was chuckling earlier this morning because you were talking about how you hoard Stratocasters. And then you sort of paused and you said, but I got a couple Les Pauls too. So the Gibson people are happy. You have both sides of the metronome, both sides of the mindful, the frenetic, and it is absolutely remarkable work, every frame I've looked at. Xiomaro, thank you very much. I have enjoyed this conversation immensely.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I don't take these interviews for granted. I'm always really humbled when someone's actually interested in what I'm doing, because I don't have any formal training. I just like to be I like to be open-minded about things and try it and experiment. And I'm always humbled and honored when I get comments from folks about photos and how I connected with them. So I really, really appreciate speaking to your audience. I hope I had something to share with them that inspires them, that they find interesting. If anyone wants to contact me, I'm a pretty friendly guy. And, if they want to email me through my website, I would love to hear from them and see their work too.
Frames. Because excellent photography belongs on paper. Visit us at www.readframes.com.